there's two transformations. There's digital transformation of currency and there's digital transformation of property. And the digital transformation of currency is something that will run very fast and very hard. And the Chinese clearly are concerned about it. The way a country is concerned about it is they're going to put in place capital controls and they're going to be regulating the currency. It happens that Bitcoin has a role because Bitcoin and the Lightning Network is a way to move digital currency.
Welcome to a thought-provoking exploration of the intersection between finance, technology, and the future of currencies. In the next few minutes, our speaker will unravel the complexities surrounding digital currencies and assets, offering insights into a world where Bitcoin is not just a currency, but a transformative force in shaping wealth, commerce, and the global economic landscape.
The rational construct is an inflationary currency and a deflationary property. Like, if you think about this really deeply, you don't really want to buy a Tesla with a Bitcoin because Bitcoin's going to $1 million and the Tesla's going to zero. What you want to do is borrow $50,000 at 4% interest to buy the Tesla. And then in 10 years, you'll have the $1 million and you'll be able to buy another Tesla, and then you'll have $10 million. So if what you want is to construct a system that makes you wealthy and keeps you wealthy and keeps all the gears of commerce spinning, the system that works best is everybody holds a digital currency and they hold a digital property or a digital asset. They're both technically assets, which is why I distinguish one as property and one as currency. And then the strategy long-term is you keep financing the property to the currency. And it's a benefit to you. For example, if you live in Argentina and you can own Bitcoin, you don't want to pay for things with Bitcoin in Argentina. You want to borrow pesos against the Bitcoin and pay for things in pesos because the peso is worth 1% of what it was 10 years ago. So if you borrowed 1 million pesos, it's going to zero and the Bitcoin is going to the moon. So you really want both. And you want to discourage people from ever selling or trading the Bitcoin. And you want to encourage them to, what you really want to do is accelerate the development of a Bitcoin banking sector where you can own the Bitcoin and borrow against it and securitize it. And so I think El Salvador's a complicated case because they don't have a currency.
Yeah.
Right? So if you had a currency, it would be different. They don't have a currency. They have to have the US dollar. I think it's pretty clear in the rest of the world, though. If we come back to this issue of currency, Peter, there's 100 million companies. And every company has accounting systems that are wired for paying their employees and paying their vendors and selling their products in the fiat currency in the country in question. So if you were to calculate the amount of money spent on those, the accounting system is the nervous system of all those companies. The nervous system of the companies is set up so like Oracle and SAP are the only two companies in the world that compete really favorably against Microsoft. They own the accounting systems of every big company in the world, and they're almost impregnable. Like, if you wanted to rip out the accounting system of Coca-Cola, and you spent a decade and you had $10 billion, you probably couldn't do it in a decade for $10 billion. If I held a gun to your head and I said, I'm going to kill you and shoot everybody in your finance staff if you don't rip out the accounting system, they'd all be dead. The accounting system isn't changing. It's that inertia. It's literally like trying to rip out all of the veins and all of the nerves in your arm and keep the arm. It's just
brain transplant.
It's too integrated. So the economy of the world is wired to run on those currencies. And the only way that you get rid of the currencies is you arm wave away every government and every corporation. So if you can imagine a future where you don't need companies and you don't need governments, then you can probably not have the fiat currency. But it's definitely not happening in this decade.
Well, that's an interesting segue because we can talk about the revolution versus evolution because there's a certain cohort within Bitcoin of people who are consider themselves sovereign individuals or seek the sovereign individual lifestyle, who are maybe more hardcore Bitcoiners, anarcho-capitalists, who definitely would be in the cohort that who challenge you, who would maybe consider your strategy is defending the dollar, whereas they want to replace the Fed, and they want to bring down government, and they want to end sovereign currencies. They want everything to be on a Bitcoin and a Bitcoin standard. Now, look, I'm in the place where I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I believe in democracy. I don't believe in the big red button of a libertarian ideal, even though I think libertarians have great ideas. But there are people who are saying that to you. And I think the problem, even with a revolution, is if you burn down the government, the state, what we have now, it will just be replaced with the same. Whereas, to your point, the evolution allows you to incrementally make things better.
Yeah, I think there's an evolutionary view and there's a revolutionary view. And if you look, and the revolutionary argument is the currencies are bad, taxes are bad, governments are bad, big corporations are bad, the banks are bad. And we don't want to support any of them. And we're revolutionaries. The evolutionary view is I invented oil and steel and electricity, and Isaac Newton invented engineering math. And is the world a better place with calculus, oil, steel, and electricity? And should we introduce it? And the evolutionary view is apolitical. It's like it's constructive and it's also cooperative. Right? Every country can benefit from calculus, steel, oil, and electricity. Mm-hmm. Right? And computers. Every country, every ideology, and the human race is better. If you look at the evolutionary view for Bitcoin, the evolutionary view would be Bitcoin is digital energy. It's a technology. Therefore, it's good for every country. And Bitcoin is digital property, and it's a better balance sheet asset than cash or credit. So therefore, every company can and should buy Bitcoin. And it's also, because it's digital property, every country can use it as a treasury asset, and they can back their currency with it. So I'm not asking for Turkey to abandon their currency, or United States or Europe or Korea or Japan or Singapore or Malaysia to abandon their currency. I'm just, instead of telling them they have to abandon their sovereignty, right? And there's irony here, right? Like people that are in favor of sovereignty want someone else to abandon their sovereignty, right? Right? Instead of telling the prime minister of Malaysia that I disagree with their currency and they should disband their police force and stop taxing people and disband their army. So it's a lot easier. Just like I'm more likely to be able to introduce oil and steel and electricity into another nation than I am to be able to introduce my political system or my ideology. If you interpret Bitcoin as technology instead of ideology, then instead of taking the position that we don't want to have money in the bank, our position would be we don't mind money in the bank as long as that money is Bitcoin and not gold, or as long as it's Bitcoin and not S&P, or as long as it's Bitcoin and not dollars, right? Change the money, keep the bank. Maybe you don't trust the bank, but on the other hand, if your brother-in-law is the chairman of the bank, and if you're at Thanksgiving dinner, and you say to your brother-in-law, if your bank starts custodying Bitcoin, your stock price will triple and all your employees will be delighted and you'll be successful in your job and your family will live happily ever after, that might work. And if you start the conversation with, Bitcoin's going to destroy your bank, you're a 20th century relic and we don't like banks or bankers and we just think you should just go ahead and quit your job. But before you quit your job, you should convince the board of directors to disband and liquidate the bank. Not likely to happen, mm-hmm. Right? Like no one's going to liquidate their country or liquidate their bank or liquidate their company or liquidate their family or liquidate their livelihood because of your ideology. And why should they have to? So the evolutionary approach is, look, Bitcoin is technology. You're Apple. This is beneficial to you. Build in the iPhone, right? You're United States. If I'm meeting with Jerome Powell, right? Bitcoin is not the currency to replace the dollar. Bitcoin is an asset that people can hold in lieu of gold or S&P indexes or property. It'll make the country work better, and it's good for the United States. It has the benefit of being true, right? I guess the real issue here is if there's $100 trillion worth of property in the form of gold and silver and rental income properties and S&P indexes and bonds that are overvalued, and Bitcoin can simply replace them all, and every bank is more successful and every investor is more successful and every country is more successful and we all live happily ever after, is that such a bad thing, right? It's like, what's wrong with living happily ever after, right? Like it's we have the phrase Bitcoin fixes this. I think Bitcoin also fixes every company and every governmental institution. So it's better if when you're thinking this through, I think it's better if you ask the question, is Bitcoin a solution to that institution? And the answer is yes, right? You get the sense sometimes there are some people in the community that if Jerome Powell were to make a press release tomorrow saying, we've seen the light and the United States is going to buy $100 billion of Bitcoin, they would be unhappy about that.
I think they'd be conflicted.
It's like they don't want other people to get the secret. But of course, the point is, if Bitcoin is money for enemies, isn't the bigger idea Bitcoin is technology to make the world a better place? And if everybody adopted Bitcoin, then maybe we wouldn't be enemies. like at the point that a company, let's say JP Morgan, what's wrong? Do I mind if JP Morgan starts custodying $100 billion of Bitcoin? They'll pick up the phone, call all their clients will start buying Bitcoin, and the price of Bitcoin will go to the roof, and it'll demonetize $100 trillion of other assets. And that means that the cost of food and housing and clothing and gold jewelry will go down. And it means that society will get more rational. And it means that the effective ability to pay deficits with inflation will be deteriorated. Over the long term, when you look out long term, meaning when Bitcoin is $500 trillion of the economy, then the marginal ability of political systems to inflate the currency is going to deteriorate.
Because it's a check and balance.
Yeah, let me take a different tack at this. I do think Bitcoin is going to collapse currencies, but it won't be the US dollar. It's going to be the 100-week currencies. And I'd even probably take that back and say it a different way. I really feel like the next step in the economic evolution of the world is the United States dollar is going to collapse all 100-week currencies if it gets on a crypto rail. If we have stablecoin US dollars, I think that every currency other than the top dozen is going to collapse and all those countries are going to dollarize. And I think that Bitcoin is going to collapse all the weak assets. We know enemy number one, gold. Gold is just an awful monetary asset, but it's not the only one. Investment properties and timberland and, buying up natural gas rights, all the things people do to avoid putting money in a savings account that generates 0% yield. They're all choices.
They're a bigger leap, though. I mean, the leap for a better currency is an immediate, obvious problem to people day to day. Someone in Turkey, I was reading Turkey, just the the everyday problems people are having now with the collapsing currency. They're skipping meals now because they can't afford food. There was a guy who put on, my brother pointed out to me, somebody put on Twitter the other day, he said, just been to Turkey, it's amazing, everything's cheap. And there was a guy who replied to him, he said, not for us. So there's that immediate pain point, like, I need that right now. Owning Bitcoin instead of owning property, like a rental property, isn't an immediate pain point to somebody. So that leap's harder for people to make.
Yeah, so there's two transformations. There's digital transformation of currency and there's digital transformation of property. And the digital transformation of currency is something that will run very fast and very hard. And the Chinese clearly are concerned about it. Mm-hmm. The way the country is concerned about it is they're going to put in place capital controls and they're going to be regulating the currency. It happens that Bitcoin has a role because Bitcoin and the Lightning Network is a way to move digital currency, right? Even when Jack Mallers talks, right, when he's talking, he's saying, well, what people want to do is send $25 from Chicago to El Salvador, so we convert it to Bitcoin, we wire it, and we flip it back again on the other end. What they're trying to do is they're trying to move the medium of exchange at the speed of light, and that's fine. the path of least resistance is the path of is the strategy of most likely success, right? It's like, if you want to be successful, then you step back and say, what am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying to give 8 billion people the strongest currency I can with the least amount of effort. And the strongest currency is the dollar, and the least amount of effort would be to put it on some kind of lightning rail or even a centralized finance system, put it on Facebook or put it on Apple, right? The problem is just they don't go to 8 billion people. But everybody in the world wants that. And then the second thing to do is give them a property asset that they can hold as a long-term store of value. And if we focus on those two things, like, what won't we focus on? I don't think we need to topple every government in the world, nor do I think we need to rewire the accounting systems. Here's the problem with the accounting system. I've already pointed out that it is physically impossible to rewire them. For trillions of dollars, you couldn't do it. But let's say it was possible. It's still illegal, which means you have to topple the government, because the distinction between currency and property is a bright line distinction in the tax code of every nation. And the IRS determined in 2014 that Bitcoin was property and the US dollar is currency. In El Salvador, they made it possible to transfer Bitcoin without paying a tax. But in every other nation on earth, the bright line establishment is when you transfer property, you owe a tax. Mm-hmm. And that means that no rational investor would ever pay for anything with a property, and no company would be able to pay for anything with the property because you're accelerating a taxable event. So unless you're willing to default on your taxes to your nation state, you can't use property as a currency.
And there you have it, a fascinating discourse on the potential transformation of our financial systems. As we conclude this discussion, we encourage you to ponder the implications of a world where Bitcoin isn't just a currency, but a powerful force reshaping economies and challenging established norms. The evolutionary view versus the revolutionary stance, the role of technology in the evolution of currency. These are concepts that may define the future. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring the realms of ideas and innovation.